Assalamualaikum, Warahmatullahi, Wabarakatuh, and welcome back to the Melanated Muslimah podcast. So today's episode is really special to me. Today we're going to be talking about why I chose the Islamic name of Khadija, and why did you notice that if you follow me on social media, I change all my stuff from the Melanated Muslimah to Brittany Khadija besides this podcast. So before we go into more detail of why I picked this name, who is Khadija, and all that stuff, on May 14th, I posted on Instagram of me reintroduced it. I posted on Instagram that I am reintroducing myself as Brittany Khadija, and I want to talk about the caption that I wrote on that day before we go into who is Khadija and so forth, and you get more information about who is Khadija from this caption. So on May 14th, I wrote, "Before and after I did my Shahada, many people asked me if I would change my name. My answer would always be no. I couldn't think of a name that would fit me. I feel like the name given to you should have meaning, and your name shapes you as a person. I remember meeting with a friend before my Shahada, and she suggested some Muslim names for me, like Aisha, Fatima, and Khadija. I rejected all of them. None of them seemed to fit me. After doing my Shahada, I started to learn more about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his wives. Last Ramadan, I watched a series called Builders of a Nation by Dr. Haifa Yunus, where she talked about the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and women of the Sahaba. One of the women stood out to me, and it was Khadija bint Khuwaylid radiyallahu anha. After learning more about her, I said if I was to ever change my name, it would be to Khadija. I was unsure if I would ever change my name to Khadija or want to be called Khadija by the Muslim community. I like my name, and name changes aren't required when you become Muslim. I want to be known as Brittany Khadija. It's a combination of the name I was given and the woman in Islam who inspired me. Inshallah, one day I will talk about why I chose the name Khadija, but for now, allow me to reintroduce myself. Assalamualaikum, my name is Brittany Khadija." So, after I posted that, I changed my name on social media to Brittany Khadija. Right now, the name Brittany represents the name that was given to me, right? And Khadija is the name of the person who inspired me the most when it comes to like Islam and Islamic history and people who are close to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So with that being said, after I posted that post, I had people like, some people say, "Hey Brittany Khadija," or "Hey Khadija." Like some people just call me Khadija now, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I will answer that. But I don't know if I officially want to be called just Khadija, but I accept it. Let's just say, call me Khadija if you want to, call me Brittany if you want to. I will answer both. They are both who I am, but I'm fine knowing to be Khadija, and I'm fine knowing with Brittany. So it's just what the person prefers, and I don't mind to be called either of them, Brittany Khadija, or just Brittany, or just Khadija. Now, I'm going to be telling you who is Khadija. Who is this wife of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Why did I want to choose her? And all that stuff. And in order for me to tell you why I chose this name, the only way I could do that is telling you about Khadija and her life. Now, I'm not an Islamic scholar, so some of the stuff I may have like backwards. Inshallah, I don't. But it's just to get like an overall view of who is Khadija and so forth. So for this research, and like even for myself when I was learning about Khadija, I decided to research more about her. And the research, I looked at videos from Dr. Umar Suleiman, Reina, and then Haifa Yunus. So these are all the people who videos I've watched to get more background on who is Khadija. Now, before that, just to give you some background, Khadija is one of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but she is the first wife. So she was there married to him before he got revelation of the Quran and before he realized that he will be the next prophet. Now let's go into the history and the biography of Khadija. So Khadija was born early. She is the firstborn child. And the name Khadija means early baby, trustworthy, and respected. So ironically, Khadija is born early and I am born early. So I just thought that was funny. And I learned about that like a little bit towards the end of when I realized that this will be the name. when I watched like one more like lecture, they talked about her being born early, and I was like, what? That is so interesting, because I was born early too. I was supposed to be born on July 11th, but I ended up coming on July 4th. I wanted fireworks and a whole bunch of baccarat for my birth. But so she was the firstborn, and she is a daughter. So she was born when people need to have sons, and the firstborn needed to be a son. And granted, she was born a girl and the firstborn girl, and it didn't seem to be an issue. And ironically, she lived in this area called in this tribe of Quraysh in Mecca, and people would, like, if they had firstborn daughters, it was like a whole bad thing. But ironically, no one seemed to mind, and the leader of Quraysh at that time, Abu Muttalib, even came to see her as a baby and noticed that she had this kind of light to her. People noticed that there was light around her. And this is her from just being a baby. Now, mind you, the leader of Quraysh, who's also in the society, who knows that having a firstborn daughter is like looked down upon, comes to visit her and then says, oh, she has this type of light to her. Like, subhanAllah, like, that is so crazy to me. And it also shows that, like, you know, they didn't even know, but like, you know, as Allah knows, like Allah had a different plan for her, that this is the future wife of the prophet that's coming. And to notice that the leaders didn't have a problem with her is very ironic, because God softened their hearts so they would not have a problem with her being the firstborn girl, so she can then later marry the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. So another thing that was interesting about Khadija's upbringing is that she was educated, which is not very common for girls during that time to be educated. So her parents allowed her to be educated by her cousin Baraka. So he was the one who taught her how to read, how to write, and he also taught her about religion and to believe in one God in a land of idol worshippers. So back in this time, the Kaaba wasn't for Muslims. The Kaaba was a place where people will worship idols. So she grew up around that time where the Kaaba is basically an idol worship space, and her uncle, who's educating her, is telling her to believe in one God. And his name is Baraka, which means blessings. And literally he is blessing her life during this time. And before she met the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam, all that stuff, she was married twice and widowed during both marriages. So she was married at the age of 15 to a person named Abu Hala, and he came from a noble family, and he was an honest man, and she became very wealthy through this marriage. And they ended up having a child, and then he passes away. Then she gets remarried to Atiq bin Abdid, and they have a son, and then he passes away. So can you imagine, you're married twice by the age of like 18, let's say, you're married twice and both of your husbands are dead. Like, I couldn't imagine how that felt, but that must have been something real heavy. Like, I would give up on love after that. Like, I'm thinking about, if I was her, like, I would be like, oh my goodness, like, I'm married twice and both of my husbands die and both of my children don't have a father. It's just crazy to think about. And later on, when she's 34, she loses her father, and then she loses her mother shortly after, and all she has left is her sister Hala. So she's a little sister named Hala. So it's just her and Hala left, and Baraka is an old man. I believe he's in his 80s around the time that her parents die. So before meeting the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam, before marrying him and all that stuff, she has this strange dream that a prophet is coming. And she goes and tells her cousin Baraka about it. And he goes, yes, there's a prophet coming. Remember, in the gospel and the Torah, they mention that there's another prophet coming. And she asks, what are the characteristics of this prophet? And it goes, he would never reciprocate evil with evil. He would not raise his voice. He's forgiving and merciful. And he wears patches, meaning that this man is not rich. So he comes from humble beginnings. So this is what Baraka tells her about some of the characteristics that this prophet would have. So later on, Khadija, from her first marriages, she becomes very wealthy and also becomes a businesswoman. And one of her business is doing trades in Yemen and in Syria. So through her business, she cannot travel to do the trade because she is a woman. So she sends people, she sends men in her place to do these tradings, and she realized that she is being gypped and cheated while doing this, and people are taking advantage of her generosity when it comes to her business and working for her. So she's complaining to her sister Hala about how she needs like honest, trustworthy workers and stuff like that. So Hala mentions a herder named Mohammed and how he's very trustworthy. So then Khadija uses him, says, okay, I will use him to help conduct my business. So she helps him. She uses him to help her with her business in Yemen and in Syria. So in this time, Khadija's like telling one of her other workers named Maysara, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. And she asks him to monitor the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. And when he comes back, he reports what he sees. When he goes, there's always a cloud following him. Like, subhanallah. Like, I think about, if you, like, I wonder how this person felt after like it was known that the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam was a prophet, and he's like revealing different scriptures and all this stuff, and this was a person noticed that there's a cloud following him. I'm like, I wonder how many people noticed that, and then after they realized that he was a prophet, where they're like, this is why this cloud was following him. I just think that's very interesting. And when the Prophet Muhammad is asked to swear on idols when he makes a trade, he doesn't, because both him and Khadija believe in one God. So I thought that was so interesting, and this is what Khadija is getting back in her reports. So the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam served Khadija for 2 years. So in this time, people are asking Khadija how come she won't get married, and it's because she's like scared of losing her wealth and people taking advantage of her. And I'm guessing it's also she's probably scared because she lost 2 husbands. You know what I mean? So like that would be a fear. I would probably be scared, like, oh, is this husband gonna die too, or something like that. So she's talking to her friend Nafisa about the Prophet Muhammad. I guess she's like trying to dig up information, like how come he isn't married and stuff like that. So when Nafisa asks him how come he isn't married, he goes, I would love to get married and so forth, but I don't have money to. And so Nafisa asks him, what about Khadija? And he goes, why would she marry me? Basically saying like, I have nothing. And remember, they said the Prophet will have nothing, like what Baraka said, the be characteristic of the Prophet, have nothing. He goes, I have nothing. Why would she marry me? And she goes, let me ask her. So then Khadija agrees to marry the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. And what is ironic about this marriage, or interesting, is that the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam is 25 and Khadija is 40. So there's a 15-year age difference. And as soon as the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam marries Khadija, his status in society changes. Now, this is very important, because how would he be able to give revelation to noble people, people with money, and people would take him seriously if his status wasn't elevated? So this marriage literally helped him elevate him so he can later on spread the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala later on in life. And him and Khadija ended up having 6 children, and out of these 6 children, they have 4 girls and 2 boys, and both of the boy children pass away. So they have Abdullah and Qasim. So those are the boys, and then the girls are Fatima, Ruwaida, and Zainab. So just like how Khadija loses 2 of her husbands, she also loses 2 of her sons with the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. So one thing that inspired me by Khadija is how she was as a wife to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam, even before revelation. So she encouraged the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam to visit his loved ones that was a part of his life since the beginning. Like, she didn't want him to forget who he was with, who loved him when he was a young boy and stuff like that. She wanted him to go and speak to them and to remember them and to have connections with them. And I think that's very beautiful, because like she could be like, oh, I'm the one who's giving you this. You don't need to like do this. Like, probably try to be controlling to him, because, you know, that's how it could be for some marriages. But she allowed him to go visit his people and to always have that connection with the people who raised him and made him the man who he is today. And when the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam would go to Mount Hira, She supported him going up there to meditate and to ask like his questions and so forth. I won't really get into like the whole revelation part of the Prophet Muhammad because I'm not like an Islamic scholar. I'm not the best. So when he's going to the Mount Hira to meditate and all that stuff, she supported him to go help. She supported him going there to find answers and the clarity that he needed. So when the Prophet Muhammad would do this, he was 40 and she was 55. And she would climb up this mountain of Hira, which is very steep. I hear people talking about it when they go to Hajj and Umrah, and they were like, how is this? Like, she's older, more older than him, and she will walk there to go bring him food. Like, subhanAllah, imagine your husband is over there in a mountain trying to get answers. Like, would you want to bring him food? Like, I think about like how good of a woman she is to like support him and not make him feel like stupid or any of that stuff. Like, obviously it's because he was a prophet, but they didn't know that then. So it just shows who she is and her character. And after the Prophet Muhammad meets the angel Gabriel, he runs to Khadija. Now, subhanAllah, imagine him, how much he trusts his wife and how much he looks for her for guidance and how much they comfort each other, that she is the first person he runs to after seeing the angel Gabriel. And he asks Khadija to cover him because he's scared. He goes, I think I'm going crazy. And she told him, and he tells her about the encounter that he had. And she said, this must be a good thing because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never disgrace you because of your good character. Like, subhanAllah, that shows how much she loved and valued him and how much of an honest man that he was back into those times. And Khadija could have criticized him and all that stuff, but no, she comforted him and believed his words. And she didn't complain about how much time he was spending on Mount Hira. She knows that it's a bigger purpose. And a part of me wonders, like, when she went to Wabarakatuh to learn about what characteristics the future prophet would have, I wonder if she ever thought that Muhammad may be that secretly. I didn't hear that in any of the stuff, but it makes me wonder. But it also shows me, like, when you look at the prophet's wives and you look at Khadija, how comforting you want to be to your husband and to the people around you, that they feel comfortable going to you in a time where they're scared and stuff like that. And one way that I found so beautiful is that Khadija helped the Prophet Muhammad to see if this is really something from God or if this is something that's not from him. So she tested the angel Gabriel with the Prophet Muhammad. So she told the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to let her know when he sees the angel Gabriel. And she said, when you see him, let me know, because she was going to test him, and he didn't know in what ways. I don't really know like the context behind it, but this is what she did. As soon as he told her that the angel Gabriel is here, she went behind him and hugged him and asked him if he was still there. He said yes, he's still there. Then she went to the next side of him and asked if he was there, and he goes, yes, he's still there. Then when Khadija went to go remove her head wrap, because back then the women covered their hair, when she went to go remove her hijab, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told her that the angel Gabriel disappeared. She goes, that must be an angel, because he showed haya, modesty, which means that only something that is evil will want to see the way that she looks, like without her hair, because that wasn't normal in a society for women to show their hair and all that stuff. So why would he go away if he didn't have modesty or haya? And her cousin Baraka is the one who taught her about the modesty of the angels and how they're modest and they don't like to see certain things and stuff like that. So that's what she used to test the angel Gabriel. And it's so beautiful that she remembered her uncle's teachings, remembering these valuable lessons, and applied them to her life later on. And she was able to test to make sure if the angel Gabriel was really an angel by doing that. So through this of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ getting revelation, Khadija was the first person to accept Islam and was one of the 4 women to perfect her faith. The Prophet Muhammad and Khadija did their first wudu together and they prayed together. And I thought about how beautiful that is, that they did these first acts together. Khadija would wake up and pray at night with the Prophet Muhammad. So she would see him praying, and being that she was so interested and so supportive of him being a prophet and getting revelation, she would go and pray with him. And after revelation came and people started to say, oh, this man is crazy, probably they were talking down on the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam and all that stuff, people started to say bad things about her. So mind you, she was a woman who was well established in the community. People knew her. She had a good business. And because her husband now is receiving revelation, she is now getting slandered and being looked down upon. So imagine this woman who was married twice, lost 2 husbands, lost 2 sons, is now married to a man. He is now getting revelation. Her status in society is being questioned, and the way that she's being viewed by people is now changing. And it's even with all this going on, she still stood by the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. And ironically, one of her daughters ended up getting divorced because of the Prophet Muhammad receiving revelation. And mind you, remember, all the stuff is happening to her, happening to her family. And Khadija looks at her daughter and says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace you with someone better. Subhanallah. Could we do that in that time? And during this time of the Prophet Muhammad spreading his message, she financially supported him. And she lost a lot of her money and stuff like that when they started to boycott Mecca and the people of Mecca. And she could have stayed in hiding during this time, when the Prophet Muhammad is receiving this, and she could say I'm not going with you. You can do your message, but I'm gonna stay here and all stuff. But she decided to go with the Prophet Muhammad and help him boycott the people of Mecca. And during this time, there wasn't a lot of food because all her money was going into supporting the Prophet Muhammad and all that stuff. And she would eat grass to survive and donate her food to the companions, to other people who are supporting the Prophet Muhammad. Subhanallah, imagine a woman being so wealthy all her life to then go and eat grass because she's supporting her husband and supporting his message. And I just think that's so beautiful, and it shows her character during that time. What I find the most beautiful during this time is that she never complained that they had little food. And I just think that's so beautiful, because think about how we can go from having an abundance of something and then we have one tough time, and how quickly we are to be in a depressive state and all that stuff, and not just being thankful that we had stuff during this time, and this is your situation now, and complaining about it is not going to change it. And I think it's so beautiful that she never complained. She never blamed the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam for the situation. She just accepted the situation as it is and did her best. The Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam noticed that she was becoming weak and losing weight. So he noticed this, and I'm thinking about, imagine how he probably felt if it wasn't for me getting revelation and really believing in his message and trying to spread the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my wife would not be getting weak. And it also makes me wonder if you think that, wow, she literally accepted me being poor, helped me change my status in society, and now the boycott of Mecca, we're now having less food and all this stuff because of my message. And I wonder how he felt during that time. And the angel Gabriel came to the Prophet Muhammad around this time and told him to tell Khadija that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends his salams to her and to give her good tidings of a pearl palace in paradise with no noise. Subhanallah. So even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent his salams to her because of her character and the way that she never complained, and told her that she'll be in a place of peace, no noise, and doesn't have to worry about anything. And she was the first to receive a salam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the ummah. So of the people that was around the Prophet Muhammad, his companions, she was the first to receive salams by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Interestingly enough, of why he probably told her that she will have a pearl palace is because she had to give away a pearl piece of jewelry for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I don't know exactly why, if it was to help get money for the Sahaba or something, but she gave away a pearl necklace for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she always gave the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam peace. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to return her peace that she's given the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam with her having peace in paradise. And she never raised her voice at the Prophet Muhammad. She never tired him or any of those things, was never trying to be a negative person towards him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to give her peace in return. So Khadija ended up dying at the age of 65 because she didn't have enough food to eat. And she died 3 days after the Prophet Muhammad's father figure, Abu Talib, dies. So Abu Talib was the person who raised the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam had to bury her himself. And at this time, there was no revelation of janazah. So there was no like the Islamic burial that you see today. There was none of that. And many of the Sahaba thought that the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam would die due to the grief that he had over Khadija's death. Many saw him crying at night, and he was being comforted by his daughter Fatima. Khadija went from a wealthy woman to a starved woman, all for the sake of Islam. Now, this makes me think, how many of us will give away our wealth, give away our the being comfortable, our comfortability, all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Now imagine you're going to get the biggest deal, the biggest like job offer, one that makes you like $100,000 more. Like imagine $100,000 more what you're making now. But it literally goes against everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything that is against Islam, this job is promoting. Or you can get a job where you make $10,000 more, and it's with the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You may have a little bit more in your pocket. You still be living in the uncomfortable situation that you are in, that you're trying to leave, but it pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How many of us would take that deal over the one that's $100,000? And I think about that, how much she believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how much of Baraka's teachings and the teachings that he gave her. Like, Baraka had to be a really amazing man and a really amazing teacher and loved God in such a beautiful way to have that imprinted on Khadija to make her the woman that she was. And it just shows for me of like when you have kids or when you're around like little children that you're around, how much of a teacher and how much of a showing of example you want to be, because look at how she lived her life. Like, I wonder how her kids viewed her, of the type of woman that she was. To know that she went from wealthy to being starved all because she believed is such a beautiful thing. And I admire that, because I think about, if I was her, would I complain? Would I be upset? And all that stuff. We don't know what it was like to be in those times back then. And we go and say, no, we knew that he was the prophet. We did this because we knew the end of the story. But imagine being in the story. And I think that it's such a beautiful thing that she never complained. And then she went through all this all because of her belief and her love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. SubhanAllah. We all can learn a lot from the story of Khadija. So after Khadija's death, Aisha, who is the last wife, I believe, of the Prophet Muhammad, she would talk about the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam's love for Khadija. So every day after Khadija's death, the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam would mention her. SubhanAllah, like thinking about how much he loved her and valued her. Because remember, this is the woman that was with him when he had nothing, to when they had everything, and then to when they lost everything, all because of him becoming a prophet. And he would not leave his home until he mentioned her, and he would praise her, like talk about her in such a beautiful way. SubhanAllah. And one day the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam was talking about Khadija to Aisha, and she became jealous. And she said, hasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you someone better than the toothless old woman from Quraysh? So she said that as a jab to Khadija being older than him. And she said that the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam's face changed, and he said, I swear by Allah that he did not give me someone better than her. She believed in me when everyone else disbelieved. She considered me truthful when others thought I was a liar. She spent her money on me, and she did not just give me empty words. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me children through her, and he did not give me children through other women. No, Allah did not give me someone better than her. Subhanallah. After he said that to Aisha, she knew at that moment that she can never say anything bad about Khadija. Subhanallah. And when I think about that, is that like that is the love we all want from our spouse. Like a love that even like in your death, even if they remarry, they would not have somebody slander your name or try to talk bad upon you and stuff like that, and always appreciate the love that you have even when in a new relationship. I can understand like how it could be like annoying if you always talked about her and stuff like that, but this is a loss. This is something that he felt, and it would be naturally to come up. And it's just, I think in a way it's beautiful that he, even after she passed away, even after he's happy, and you know, they said that Aisha was his favorite wife, and some would say the one of the most beloved wives of him, and to see how much he still like bigged up Khadija during that time is such a beautiful thing, and it shows that his love for her and his appreciation for her. And I feel like we all should have people who appreciate and love us and talk about us like that in our lives. And when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would slaughter sheep, he would give some of the meat to the loved ones of Khadija. Subhanallah. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would hear Khadija's sister's voice, Hala, he would get excited because her voice was just like Khadija's. And their daughter Zainab was married to a man named Abu al-As, and he was a good man, but he didn't believe in Islam. So when he fought a battle against the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and was captured, Zainab came to the prison to come and get him, like, oh, I want my husband back. And to help her cause, she gave someone who like eventually gave the necklace to the Prophet Muhammad, and she gave them a necklace that belonged to Khadija. And when the Prophet Muhammad saw the necklace that used to belong to Khadija that Zainab had gave, he started to cry. And he told his companions, if you want to release Zainab's prisoner, then release him, and then return the necklace. Subhanallah. So she knew what she was doing. She's like, I'm going to show up with his necklace to help my father's cause because I know how much he loved my mother. Subhanallah. So after being in Medina, when they returned back to Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had so many people offer their homes to him, offer him land and stuff like that. And when he came back, he didn't go to any of that, any of those lands, any of those nice palaces. He pitched a tent next to Khadija's grave. Subhanallah. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, he was blessed by the love of Khadija. And with that being said, after I listened to this story, how could you not admire Khadija in so many ways? Her level of faith, her level of believing in one God, her level of, taking the Islamic knowledge that Barakah taught her, and so forth. And I know I said that Barakah was her cousin, but in some things I wrote cousin and uncle. So I'm not too sure if he was a cousin or uncle. So if I mistake that, I'm so sorry. But hopefully you got the gist of the story. But how can you not love her based on her faith, based on her believing in her husband, based on her supporting her husband, based on her not complaining when they had no food and still believing in the message and stuff like that, and giving the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, prophet comfort and motivation during this time that could have been very hard for him. Because imagine if you're someone who receives revelation and people are like turning their backs on you, and her being such a good person and still being a businesswoman in a time where women weren't really this. So she was breaking up so many barriers and all that stuff. It's just like so much that I admire from her. That is why I picked that name. I learned about all of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and something about Khadija just stuck out to me is her generosity and the way that she loved the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And you can tell the type of woman she was by the way the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ loved her and still hold her to such high value after she passed away. And when you think about the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam's story, his story would not be the same if it wasn't for Khadija. If it wasn't for Khadija getting tired of people scamming her, right? If it wasn't for these scammers stealing her money, she would never have had the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam in her life. What was also very interesting is that she died when Islam was very in its early stages, so she never got to see Islam bloom. She never got to see the future revelation. Yet, without Khadija, none of the Islamic knowledge and stuff that we would have today would exist if it wasn't for her being the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam. This is why I admired Khadija. Her story inspired me. One, being a businesswoman, breaking the mold out here, supporting and loving her husband, believing in God to a very powerful way, that none of the stuff of her losing her wealth or being hungry phased her, because she knew that it was for a bigger purpose. And that is why I chose the name Khadija. So if somebody asks me, why did I pick Khadija? I'm going to send them to this podcast. If somebody asks you, why did I pick the name Khadija? Send them to this podcast episode. And it's also a good reminder for us all to go back and listen to the stories of the Sahaba, listen to the stories of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi wasallam's wives, and have us be inspired. Because think about some of the amazingness that you hear about them, the amazing things that they do, and stuff like that. Think about if you were there, would you be able to do this knowing that you don't know what you know now, and the ending of the journey of Islam? This is when it was happening. And imagine, would you be this faithful like some of these people to the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So I think it's a good reflection. So yeah, this is why I chose the name Khadija. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something more. Again, I am not an Islamic scholar, so if I said something incorrectly, please forgive me. And yes, I hope you enjoyed. Assalamualaikum, Warahmatullahi, Wabarakatuh.